Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Cristi Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Cristi Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to episode 17 of Grieving Insomniacs. This is Cristi Haberman, your host. Today we're going to be talking about mental health and grieving. And I was trying to decide if mental health was a secondary loss from grief, or is it the being labeled that you have a mental health issue is really the problem when you're grieving. So I have a few disclaimers before we get started. So I am trained as a mental health counselor. I went to school a long time ago, like 20 plus years ago. I've been licensed since 2005. And when I was going to school, we didn't talk about grief very much. My training is in marriage and family therapy, and I just didn't get the education in grief that I thought I would. Of course, they talked about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I cannot emphasize again that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did her research on people that were dying. It was never meant to be applied to people that were grieving. And so in that way, all of these years, her research has been misused. And that was the extent of my grief education. And I had counseled grieving people. And now looking back, I realize I didn't do it very well. I remember one person in particular. I don't remember her name anymore, but I just remember her looking at me, and it was the look I remember the most, how I just didn't get it. And I knew that in that way that I had failed her when I was counseling her. And then Christopher died. And when Christopher died, I felt very, very betrayed in the respect that I had no idea of how bad the mental health aspect of grief was. And I realized that when we educate counselors, when we educate mental health professionals, including psychiatrists and doctors, we do a very poor job of it when it comes to grief. And so I'm putting that out there as my bias from the very beginning as we go on to talk about mental health, is that I recognize and understand that the world does not treat grievers, especially in the mental health professions, very well. So in my own journey through grief, almost immediately I couldn't sleep. And I haven't really talked to people about this too much, but I would really like to know is maybe I'll put it on as a poll, is how many of you don't sleep after the loss of your child? I could say that is, when it comes to secondary losses, the ability to sleep is a big one for me. So almost immediately I went to a psychiatrist and got sleep medication because I couldn't sleep. And I am sure that if I had I did go to counseling, that they would probably diagnose me as depressed. And I really think that is a mistake that many professionals, when it comes to mental health, make. And it goes back to treatment. So cognitive behavioral treatment is what they use for depression. In cognitive behavioral therapy, what we do is we help people make the connections between their irrational beliefs and reality. So, an example of this is oftentimes depressed people think, I am such a loser. I fail at everything. Well, statistically, that's not possible that somebody fails at everything. So, you help them find the things that they don't fail at. Many times it's all about perspective. When it comes to irrational beliefs and grief, and one irrational belief is, I wish I could have done something different. If I had done something different, my loved one would still be alive. We all have that. Trying to apply cognitive behavioral therapy to that is just going to anger the person that's experiencing it. And so when it comes to grief, and this is just my belief as someone that has experienced both as a mental health professional and as someone that's grieving, in grief, you have to sit with that person for as long as it takes for them to realize that they couldn't have done anything else. And that process might take years. For myself, it's taken years. And if you told me that there was nothing I could have done, I would just get mad and lash out at you. I needed someone that would sit with me and help me process through it. And I think that that's part of what's frustrating to mental health professionals is they are used to being able to medicate it away, therapize it away, but what they're not good at is sitting there with you in the emotion of it. And that's what our families don't get. That's what our friends don't get is that grieving people need someone to be with them in their pain. So we don't feel so alone. That's why we reach out on Instagram specifically. I see people reaching out over and over and over again and getting support from other grieving people. This is why support groups are so important. And it's really heartbreaking that professionals don't have the ability to do that. So there's still people out there that believe, like in uh, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, that there's these specific, definite stages to grief. Now, that might be for some people, but I kind of doubt it. Um, it's all messed up in there together. In 1 minute, I can be angry. The next minute, I'll be sad. The next minute, I'll be hating things. It's up and down and up and down. And then maybe for a second, there's acceptance, and then you're on the roll again. And one thing that is hard to understand when you're not a griever is how relentless it is. How that there is not a moment in the day that you escape it. And then we get tired. You get tired from having this constant battle going back and forth inside your head. And so many people get misdiagnosed, I believe, when they're grieving. So they get misdiagnosed with depression when having experienced both. Grieving is so much deeper and darker than depression. It is a very flat, dark place to be. And I am pretty sure that that's pretty universal. The other thing that I think people get diagnosed with is anxiety. So once you figure out that the world is unsafe, and that almost always happens when you lose someone, is immediately your sense of safety and how you are in the world changes. That causes anxiety. For some people, they'll never feel safe again. And so instead of trying to help people find a sense of safety in the world, many prescribers will give them medication to help them feel safe. And that's really not what they need. What they need is someone to help them feel safe in the world. That's the first misdiagnosis. And then the second misdiagnosis is, in one support group I was in, I saw a lot of people being diagnosed with bipolar, which is just extreme highs, extreme lows, and that could have been present before the grief, and it just manifested itself. But I think it's probably more likely that there are a lot of fluctuations of emotions when you are grieving. And if you are more emotionally reactive, we call it, than other people, I could see where you would get that diagnosis. The other area where, and I'm very careful about talking about this, I'll probably do a podcast on it, but as soon as Christopher died, I became interested in life after death and the paranormal. I don't want to talk too much about that belief system because I'm going to do a whole podcast about it. But there is the possibility that if you are too open about those beliefs, that you're going to cause some anxiety in your therapist or your psychiatrist that you're seeing, and they're going to think that perhaps you have a little delusions going on. Delusions would be, so a delusion is a fixed belief that is not based in reality. So one of my delusions possibly could be is that I believe my son sends me signs or he talks to me through the music. I'm very careful about who I talk to about that and those kind of beliefs for that reason, that I know that there are people out there that'll be like, "Oh, she's crazy." Uh, when I do talk about my belief in the paranormal, uh, I've had people laugh at me. We had this meet and greet at my work, and I always get very anxious. I don't want to talk about my family because invariably when you talk about your family, you talk about your son that died. People just can't handle that. So I was trying to think, what could I tell these people that would not expose me to my vulnerability, so to speak. So I decided to tell them, well, I have a huge interest in the paranormal. And everybody started laughing because they think of ghosts. But I said werewolves and vampires because I was really trying to steer them away from what I really truly believed in. And they all start laughing, which I'm fine with, but you have to be really careful about who you share those beliefs with and can't expect them to accept them, I think would probably be the word. You don't want, so when it comes to mental health, and so many grieving people reach out to counselors, or they reach out to psychiatrists or other helping professionals and hope that they can help provide them some relief because that's what we're taught to do in mental health. Well, the counselor can help you, a social worker can help you, someone in the helping profession can help you. And I can tell you, as someone that was educated by the current mental health system, that is not the case. So I just want to put it out there to people to be very, very careful about what you believe that these people are saying to you. And that you need to hold on to what you know is true and valid about your experiences. So if a therapist says to you, and I have heard it all, you should be over that by now. Really? How long? How long is that? So what I want to say to people when they say things to me like that is, all right, you go home tonight and you look around the dinner table and you pick one person to not be there. Which one of those people do you want to live without? And then which one of those people do you want to forget? And when you put it to people like that, they stop saying such stupid things. And so if you have a therapist like that, to walk away, because you have to hold on, because that is just crazy making, because we know as grievers what our experiences are, and we have to quit accepting what these professionals tell us that the experiences are. So I wrote a book called The Solitary Journey Through the Loss of a Child. And I went through and I wrote it back in 2005. So that this is only true up until that point. I don't have access to research anymore because I'm not in school. I had a friend in school that was letting me use her library access at that time. So I don't have it anymore. But I looked up all of this research, and they did research on about death, really, grieving. Most of the research out there is being done on widows and widowers. So people that are 60, 65. There is very little research on people that had lost children. And in fact, then they did research on psychologists, and I'm trying to remember that there were psychology students, and they were rating scenarios, and they rated the loss of the children a loss of a child working with someone with the loss of a child very negatively, like they couldn't work with them. And that's a very valid experience. So when it comes to your mental health, you need to be very careful about what people tell you. That's what I want to emphasize absolutely the most, is that if you go into a therapist office and they deny your experience, run. Don't walk, run out the door. So finding someone, and I think that there are people out there that are willing to listen, that are willing to understand what your experience is. So I don't think that you necessarily have to go to someone that lost a child, but that would be ideal. And there are many of us out there. We're not always very vocal about it, but we are out there. In the area that I live in, people got referred to me. And if they had lost a child, I was honest with them about that. But I was also honest with them about that I was a little bit the way that I went about counseling someone that had lost a child is much different than what I would do if they came into me for some other problem. And so over the years, I've kind of developed my own method. And it mainly consists of letting people take the time that they need to take. It takes as long as it takes for people to get from point A to point B to point C to point, and they determine what the points are. I don't determine the points. And it can be a long process. Like I said, it can take years. In my own personal struggles with on the mental health from the grief, I talk about the fear. I think that's the biggest thing for me is the fear. I'm very fear-based these days. I'm also very, I guess people would say, anxious. It's kind of weird because I've actually become more self-confident, but I'm also more anxious. And I'm convinced it's about that being the safety in the world. And so once someone dies or you go through a traumatic experience, you become much more aware of other traumas that are around you. And you become much more suspicious of people. And I would have to say that grief has robbed me of that also. So I used to be I got accused all the time of having rose-colored glasses. Oh, I saw the world in rose-colored glasses. I don't see people really for who they are. I have definitely lost that. I keep people at arm's length, and I know that's because of, I hesitate to call it mental health, but that's what it is because I have no trust. I have no trust in the world. I have no trust in people. I just don't trust. And that is a consequence of the grieving. And I'm putting that in the mental health range because it's emotions. And when we talk about mental health, we're talking about people's emotions. And I really shy away from diagnosis. I really don't like that. Diagnosis is necessary to get paid. Diagnosis is necessary sometimes for treatment because in order to have a certain diagnosis, you have to have a certain treatment, like depression with cognitive behavioral. Borderline, they do dialectical behavior therapy. Severe depression, they do electrical shock therapy. So oftentimes the diagnosis drives what the treatment is going to be. Well, grieving, there is no treatment. No one has, I see advertisements for the grief recovery method or um, become grief counselor certified. There is no such thing. And like I told you, when I wrote my book in 2005, and it could be different, but I highly doubt it, um, there wasn't research being done on grieving people, which means no one really understands that. So understand that. So, in order to have a problem, psychologists research the problem. They help identify characteristics of the problem, and then that defines the treatment. They have not done that for grieving mothers. Very little is out there, and very little of it is published. So, no one really knows about us. They don't know what the emotions we go through. They don't know. I've talked about the health consequences of losing a child, mental health consequences of losing a child, losing family and friends over losing a child, losing your sense of self over losing a child. Like none of that has been researched. So we talk to each other. There's many different podcasts like mine that different people talk. And I notice myself how similar some of the things are that we are saying. We all have our own little takes on it, but they're very similar. And so there are things about being a grieving mother that are in common with each other. We just don't have anyone that studied that yet. So if there's any takeaway from this podcast, that would be it. Is that you are the expert. You are the expert on you. And don't let anybody tell you different. That if you're feeling this way and you know it's because of the grief, then that's it. And I think universally, I can't imagine, honestly, if I still had little kids, what my level of fear would be in trying to keep them alive. And it was bad enough when they were little kids because I'm prone to anxiety anyway. Um, Worrying about this person was going to hurt him or this person was going to hurt him, what was happening at daycare. Like even now I get panic attacks thinking about certain situations that happened when they were kids. So I can't imagine having a child after Christopher died. That is just the scariest thing for me. And to think about having to care for one. Because I just would be so fear-ridden every moment of the day. So for those of you out there that do that every day, I'm so proud of you. So proud that you are able to manage that and to raise children and to live in this world and still function. I think it's admirable. Admirable. Sorry, I'm having trouble with my words again today. I just admire each and every one of you. And I know you can't see it in yourselves right now. And I don't want to make anyone angry when I say this, but there is a strength in you that you have survived till this point. And you'll keep surviving day after day after day. And I don't think that you all realize how successful you are, just the fact that you are surviving. Because this is a heavy burden we carry. And I just want you to know I see you all, I hear you all, and I am just amazed that we have all of these powerful women. And we're creating a movement. We're creating a world where people are going to recognize all of the aspects of grief. And it's because each and every one of you is speaking out about what it's like for you. And if there is any positives in this, it's that. So, yes, there are mental health consequences 100% from having lost a child. And there is lots of secondary losses. But there's a lot of amazing women out there that are speaking up, using their voices, helping others. And I just want you all to know that I'm proud of all of you. And that you are the experts. I get really frustrated when I see the stories about psychologists and social workers and other counselors that, don't understand. So find yourself someone that will go with you into your pain and sit with you and be with you and help you work through it because you are the expert. So thank you for listening. This is Cristi Haverman. That went much quicker than I thought it would. This is Grieving Insomniacs. I appreciate each and every one of you that are listening to my podcast. Leave me some feedback, like and subscribe. And I'll see you next week.